In How Countries Go Broke, Ray Dalio explores the intricate dynamics that lead nations into financial distress and, ultimately, bankruptcy. The book provides a detailed analysis of the economic, political, and social forces that contribute to sovereign default, drawing on both historical case studies and modern economic theory. Dalio examines the factors that influence a country's financial stability and the processes through which sovereign debt crises can unfold, offering lessons on how countries can avoid the path to insolvency and bankruptcy. Dalio begins by discussing the basic economic principles that underpin a country's ability to remain solvent. At the core of these principles is the relationship between a nation's debt, its income, GDP, and its ability to service that debt. A country's debt burden becomes problematic when it grows faster than its ability to repay or when external shocks, such as a sudden drop in income or an increase in borrowing costs, push the country into a debt trap. When this happens, the country may default on its obligations or undergo significant financial restructuring to avoid complete insolvency. A key theme in Dalio's book is the importance of maintaining a sustainable debt-to-GDP ratio. He argues that while borrowing can be an effective tool for financing investments and stimulating economic growth, excessive debt can lead to instability and crisis. Dalio explains that countries must balance their debt levels with their economic output to ensure they can service their debt without risking default. When debt becomes unmanageable, the country may face rising interest payments that consume an increasing share of its national income, leading to economic stagnation and potentially a default on its debt. Dalio also highlights the role of foreign debt in pushing countries toward bankruptcy. When a nation borrows in foreign currencies, it exposes itself to exchange rate risks. If the value of its currency falls, the cost of servicing foreign debt rises, potentially making the country's debt unsustainable. Countries with large foreign debt burdens are vulnerable to global financial conditions, as changes in interest rates, capital flows, or investor sentiment can lead to sudden and severe financial pressure. Dalio explains that foreign debt can be particularly dangerous in emerging markets, where currency fluctuations and external shocks are more common. Another critical factor that Dalio explores is the political dynamics of debt accumulation. Governments often face pressure to borrow in order to finance social programs, infrastructure projects, and other public services. However, political leaders may also succumb to the temptation to borrow excessively to meet short-term political objectives, such as winning elections or appeasing voters. This can lead to a gradual buildup of unsustainable debt, as governments fail to make tough decisions about spending and taxation. Dalio notes that political instability and poor governance can exacerbate this problem, leading to a breakdown in fiscal discipline and the mismanagement of public finances. Dalio also examines the impact of inflation on a country's financial health. Inflation erodes the purchasing power of a nation's currency, making it harder for citizens to maintain their standard of living and for governments to service their debt. While inflation can reduce the real burden of debt in some cases, Dalio cautions that high inflation can also create instability, undermine confidence in the currency, and lead to social unrest. Countries that rely on printing money to finance their debt often find themselves in a vicious cycle, where inflation spirals out of control and the country's finances deteriorate further. A significant portion of Dalio's analysis is devoted to the behavior of creditors and the role they play in sovereign defaults. Creditors, including foreign governments, international financial institutions, and private investors, often become reluctant to lend to countries that show signs of financial distress. As a result, countries in financial trouble may face higher borrowing costs or even a complete shutdown of their access to capital markets. Dalio points out that in many cases, creditors are not just passive observers but active participants in managing a country's debt crisis. He explains how the negotiation process between borrowers and creditors can often determine the outcome of a sovereign default. Debt restructuring, which may involve extending the repayment period or reducing the amount of debt owed, is often a necessary part of the resolution process. Dalio further delves into the role of central banks and monetary policy in shaping a country's financial situation. Central banks have the ability to control inflation, manage interest rates, and influence the value of a country's currency. However, Dalio notes that central banks can also become part of the problem when they fail to maintain proper checks and balances. In cases where central banks act irresponsibly by printing excessive amounts of money or failing to respond to inflationary pressures, they can contribute to a country's financial breakdown. Dalio explains that the effectiveness of central banks is largely dependent on their independence and commitment to maintaining economic stability, which can be undermined by political pressures or poor decision-making. Dalio also explores the psychological factors that influence how countries react to financial crises. He explains that during times of economic distress, public sentiment and national morale can deteriorate, leading to social unrest, political upheaval, and a loss of confidence in institutions. In extreme cases, this can trigger a downward spiral of economic decline, with citizens withdrawing their savings, businesses shutting down, and the country's ability to recover becoming increasingly difficult. Dalio emphasizes the importance of maintaining public trust in government institutions and leadership, as well as fostering a sense of national unity during times of crisis. The book also touches on the role of international organizations, such as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, in helping countries navigate financial distress. Dalio explains that these organizations can play a crucial role in providing financial assistance and technical expertise to countries facing debt crises. However, he also notes that the involvement of international organizations can sometimes be politically sensitive, as countries may resist outside intervention and perceive it as an infringement on their sovereignty. Dalio argues that a collaborative approach, with input from both domestic and international actors, is often the most effective way to resolve sovereign debt crises. Dalio concludes by reflecting on the broader implications of sovereign bankruptcy for the global economy. He warns that the consequences of a country's default are not limited to the affected nation but can ripple through the global financial system, potentially triggering a wider economic crisis. He calls for greater cooperation between countries and international financial institutions to prevent sovereign defaults and manage the risks of debt accumulation. Dalio's book serves as both a cautionary tale and a guide for policymakers, offering a comprehensive understanding of how countries go broke and how they can avoid or mitigate the devastating effects of financial collapse. In How Countries Go Broke, Ray Dalio provides an insightful and thorough examination of the causes of sovereign debt crises, drawing on his wealth of experience in economics and finance. His exploration of the economic, political, and social dynamics of debt crises offers valuable lessons for policymakers, investors, and anyone seeking to understand the complex and interconnected nature of global finance. Dalio's analysis emphasizes the need for fiscal discipline, strong governance, and a balanced approach to managing debt in order to ensure long-term economic stability.